This video is about the General Education Competency. There are 6 General Education Competencies that Mercy College likes to implement into the General Education courses. The 6 General Education Competencies are 1. Oral communication learning outcomes, quantitative reasoning, reading fluency, written communications, critical thinking, and information literacy. I was able to show 2 of these General Education Competencies through previous learning activity I did in one of my general education courses. I established the knowledge for 2 of the 6 general education competencies in my course in spring 2016, Computer Social Behavior Sciences, which was a prerequisite for my methodology course. One of the general education competencies I established knowledge for was critical thinking. Critical thinking involves the ability to analyze and interpret insightfully and in depth at the completion of the general education curriculum. I was able to provide evidence of my knowledge on critical thinking through the paper at this course, looking at the relationship between affiliated humor styles and happiness. The first point of critical thinking is to evaluate the viewpoints or assumptions of others. One person I evaluated to use in my paper was Romeo. He researched the effects of humor styles on organizational outcomes, and his study found that humor was an active and significant role in an individual's organization regarding leadership and the management in which can provide a positive effect on organization outcomes. And I used his evaluated sources to help me in my research. The second point of critical thinking is evaluate their own viewpoints or assumptions. I was able to evaluate my own viewpoints and assumptions in this paper and incorporated my knowledge for critical thinking by writing, "It is expected that affiliated humor styles does have a relationship with happiness and in a positive way." I backed that up with my own viewpoints from previous research and my own thoughts. When families incorporate affiliated humor styles into their family's functioning, it will enhance their family functioning positively, bringing more communication into their household. These were my own viewpoints and assumptions to back up my critical thinking on my topic in this. The third point of critical thinking is to create a specific position, perspective, thesis, hypothesis that takes into account the complexities of an issue. I was successful at providing a position and perspective of this paper by including a hypothesis of my paper. The hypothesis was for this study to investigate the relationship of a person's humor style and his/her happiness. Specifically, this study looks at people above the age of 18 and will ask, is happiness related to affiliated humor style? I also included an in-depth study design and procedure, allowing the reader to see exactly what I would be doing for my study. The perspective of this paper was clearly shown by showing the reader that the study will provide knowledge on a relationship between humor styles, specifically affiliated humor style and happiness within the participants selected. The fourth point of critical thinking was synthesize information from sources, and I incorporated this into my paper. How I incorporated point 4 of critical thinking into my paper to show evidence of my knowledge on point 4 was I explained how I was using 2 questionnaires to measure an individual's happiness in relationship to affiliated humor style. Point 5 of critical thinking was draw logical conclusions and identify consequences and implications. I identified consequences and implications in this paper by explaining the strengths and weaknesses that I had through my study. The strength of this study is when an individual has a high level of happiness, he/she can have greater satisfaction with anything relevant to his or her life. Then I stated how this study is limited to research on adults above the age of 18, and it may not normalize the general population because of majority of populations in adolescence, and that was a limitation of my study. And I was able to identify both the strengths and limitations, which links back to the critical thinking of point 5. The logical conclusion that I drew was that the current study fills an important gap in looking at the relations between happiness and affiliated humor style. In the future, this study could be expanded into looking at individuals of all ages. In this paper I wrote, I was also able to show my knowledge and incorporate information literacy. Information literacy is when it involves the ability to identify, retrieve, evaluate, organize, cite properly, and use a wide range of resources, including print, graphic, and electronic, for independent learning and practical problem solving at the completion of a general education curriculum. And that is exactly what I did in this paper. Point 1 of information literacy is to determine the nature and extent of information needed. How I provided evidence of my knowledge on this point was in my study design and procedures section of the paper. I stated exactly what I would be doing, what I needed, as of my 2 questionnaires to come to the conclusion of this paper. I also identified the variables that I would be looking at and the extent of the information of these variables I would need. The second point of information literacy is select the most appropriate investigate methods or information retrieval systems for accessing the needed information. The investigation methods I was using was 1, for my point on happiness, I was using the Oxford Happiness Questionnaire, and for humor style, I was using the Humor Style Questionnaire. These 2 questionnaires were the methods I used and the retrieval systems for accessing the needed information on making the conclusions of this study. The third point is evaluate the information and its sources critically. I evaluated information from sources such as researcher Fox and others to be able to come up with my hypothesis of looking at the correlation between affiliated humor style and happiness. Evaluating information from researcher Fox as a source critically was able to give me the background information that individuals with affiliated humor like to make people laugh in general. This a positive approach the individual has relates to why peer victimization happens less in people who carry that humor style. These sources were able to give me background information to benefit me coming up with a hypothesis as also drawing my own conclusions. As I evaluated info from sources to help my own information, I also evaluated my own information from sources to come to discuss my study accurately and positively. By evaluating information and sources critically, it allowed me to show the readers that the current study I was doing demonstrated how an individual who carries a positive humor style like affiliated humor style will commonly have a high level of happiness. And I was able to come to this conclusion from using questionnaires and other sources as background. The fourth point of information literacy was use information effectively to accomplish a specific purpose. I used my information effectively and I was able to accomplish a specific purpose, and I demonstrated that in the beginning of my study and my paper in the abstract, where I let the reader see the objective of the paper, the participants I would be using in the study, the methods I would use to come to a conclusion, and the results that I found, and from the results I was able to conduct and explain my conclusion of the entire study. The final point of information literacy is to access and use information ethically and legally. In this paper, you can see that I used my sources and information ethically and legally by using my sources in in-text citations, which is the legally and ethically way to support others' information, including it in my own. By having a reference page at the end of my paper, I was ethically and legally giving the credibility to those that I used in my paper. In this study that I completed, in the research paper that I wrote, I was able to show my evidence of my understanding to establish my ability in the 2 of 6 general education competencies. In this paper, I showed my understanding for critical thinking and information literacy. This paper looked at the affiliated humor style in relation to an individual's happiness. And through this paper, I showed correctly and my understanding of how to incorporate critical thinking and information literacy into a general education course.